Who is the author of this text, and what is the main focus and or theme of this text?
The book that I have chosen to review is Catch 67, The Left, the Right, and the Legacy of the Six-Day War by Micah Goodman, an Israeli philosopher of Jewish thought. This book was originally written for an Israeli audience to, in Goodman's words, help heal the discord between the left and the right. However, it appears to have done the opposite, as both sides of this heated debate accuse Goodman of appealing too much to the opposing side. As stated previously, Goodman hoped to heal the divide in Israeli discourse. He aimed to do this by analysing both the left and the right and their evolution since the time of Theodor Herzl. In this analysis, Goodman repeatedly places emphasis on the idea that to heal the divide, both sides of the debate need to talk to, not just at, each other when they discuss Palestine and other polarising topics. To do this, Goodman puts forward the Talmudic story of why Beit Hillel's school of thought won over that of Beit Shammai's as the mainstream school of thought in the Talmudic law. Beit Hillel's school of thought won not due to their opinions being more valid, but because they were willing to listen to the other side, rather than just denouncing them. As such, Goodman argues that both the left and the right are correct. However, they both need to listen to each other without denouncing one another before they can address the issues facing Israel today.
Can you please summarise the author's main arguments within this text and how they relate to the overall theme of this book?
The author has divided this book into 3 sections, each covering a different part of the Israeli public and political discourse, and as such, in my analysis of these arguments, I'll be doing the same. In the first section of Catch 67, Goodman examines the political ideologies of the left and the right, along with their evolution from the past. Goodman argues that both sides are not dissimilar in that they both wish for what is best for Israel. However, many Israelis, be they from the left or the right, are too emotionally attached to their opinions on the topic of Palestine and the neighbouring Arab countries. He goes on that each Israeli's view on the conflict forms an integral part of their identity, and to object to that view is to dismiss or object to their whole identity. This in turn makes them unable to listen to each other. To mend this divide, Goodman argues that each side needs to take the time to listen to one another's arguments without instantly labelling them as a threat to the nation and its stability. Goodman goes on to analyse the shift in ideologies that both the left and the right have experienced since the time of Theodor Herzl. He argues that the right underwent a change from liberal and predominantly secular. They then developed into messianists and eventually changed once again to what we see today, a faction mostly focused on security. However, this is not just isolated to the right. Goodman argues that the left have underwent a similar shift from socialists, then pacifists, and much like the right, changed once again to what we see today, which is a faction mostly focused on human rights and the evils of occupation. Goodman believes that the new right and the new left are mirror images of each other. The left have ceased arguing that withdrawing from the territories will bring peace, but rather that having a continued military presence there will be the downfall of Israel, while the new right no longer argues that settling the gained territories will bring forth their so-called redemption, but that withdrawing from them will instead bring disaster upon Israel and her people. Goodman maintains that both sides have undergone this shift predominantly due to the First and Second Intifada, which forced the populace of Israel to rethink their position on the oppression of another people within their own borders. In the second section of Catch 67, Goodman analyses the paradoxical ideas of the left and the right. Goodman pushes the idea that both sides of the political sphere have proven to be right in their own way, hence the current crisis of ideas that they find themselves in. The main ideas and themes of this section are whether or not the Israeli military presence in the conquered regions should continue, and what the effect of a retreat from these regions would be to Israel. This section also covers the major question of demography and security. To this end, Goodman argues that a continued presence in the territories both fulfills Zionism and goes against Zionism. Retreat from the territories both fulfill prophetic Judaism but chip away at the national identity. A presence in the territories protects Israel geographically but threatens it demographically. In this view, both sides are correct, and due to this, they find themselves in such a perilous position. Finally, in the third section, Goodman puts forth a plan that could help both heal the divide within Israel and at least somewhat address the issue of Palestine. Goodman outright rejects the established idea that to achieve anything between Israel and Palestine would require achieving everything at once. That is, a pledge to end all claims on either side forever, meaning that Palestinian Authority will give up the rights to the land of Israel and that Israel will give up the rights to Judea and Samaria. But this is short-sighted. History has shown that no Palestinian government has ever accepted any Israeli peace plan, and that is not likely to change anytime soon. Goodman describes the clash between Israel and Palestine as a clash of emotions, which is the Israeli fear of Palestine and the Palestinians' feeling of humiliation at the hand of the Israelis. To address this, Goodman puts forward a plan that even in the absence of a peace deal, Israel could use to do what is morally right and help the Palestinian people. The first step of this plan is to support the Palestinians' right to an independent state with their own government. Goodman then proposes building roads, tunnels, and transportation links between Palestinian towns, and at the same time remove all checkpoints within the West Bank. Goodman realizes that it is unlikely that the Israeli government of today would sign off on these ideas. However, he makes the point that governments are ever-changing, and at some point in the near future, we may reach a point where this is not such a far-flung ideal.
How was your reading experience and what were your main takeaways?
This was quite an interesting read. Goodman gave a great commentary on the nature of the right and the left in Israel and what the main problems facing them are both today and in the past. The way in which this book was structured made the book easy to understand and digest. By dividing the book into 3 major sections that each covered a part of the Israeli psyche, I have walked away with a much better understanding of the position that Israel and Palestine are currently in. The main takeaway of this book are that both sides of the political sphere are correct in some of their arguments about the safety and future of Israel, however they are unable to come to an agreement. Another takeaway is that many Israelis hold their political view very strongly, to the point that it forms a part of their identity. And the final takeaway was that this was a much more complex problem than I had initially believed it to be.
And how do you feel this book relates to the overall content of this course?
This book gives a great commentary on the political divide within Israel and the Jewish community as a whole. Goodman, in his analysis of the left and right, touches on many points within the history of Israel and Zionism. The main areas that Goodman touches on in this text are of political and social nature, and as such relate mostly to the content covered in weeks 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9. Thank you for listening, and that is all for today.